Hello there, I'm back for another day of study skills and something new in the COVID-19 world. Also, I washed my hair. I think you should all know that, considering we're not leaving the house a whole lot. That's special. Okay, study skills first. We're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite and most important study skill concepts, which is retrieval practice or recall. So a lot of times when you're learning stuff, and especially in a classroom, this happens, you are absorbing the information and you can feel like you understand it and it makes sense in your brain. And that is true, especially when people are talking about information. You definitely feel like it makes sense in your brain. And the moment you move away from that information, so think about it, you walk out of a classroom, what happens? Boom, you can't remember anything. That is because for the brain to actually connect and make those connections, it needs recall methods, which means it needs to remember what it's doing. So one of the reasons this works in live classrooms is that in my classroom, for instance, I see people 3 days a week, and each of those days, I repeat some of the same information, and I ask my students to remember it. I ask them to actually think about it and say it back to me. So they read something in their book, and then in class I say, okay, now what's this? And people have to remember it, and they practice this concept of recall or retrieval. That is harder to do on your own because you don't have somebody constantly bothering you about it. So here are my tips for recall and retrieval practice if you're trying to learn either from video or from reading as your only method. In each case, do the thing for a little while, like 5-10 minutes, turn away from it and see what you can remember. Either do it out loud or write it down or something like that. But each time, so if you're reading, read a page or two. When you get to like a section break, stop and try to make notes on the stuff that you read without looking, so you force your brain to recall. Same with listening. So if you're watching a video, stop. I need a drink. No. Someone stuck in my larynx pop. Sorry about that. They have allergies. It's that time of year. So when you're watching a video, same thing. Watch a segment of it, stop it, try to remember what you learned. Quizzing yourself is also real important when you're trying to learn new things, so you remember the words. That was super fun. So that is my study tip for the day, is practice recall and remembering things and try to think about it. And then do the same thing the next day. Keep trying to remember the stuff that you needed to learn, or try to remember what you learned the day before. And I'll talk more about that tomorrow when I talk about spacing practice. All right. If we've mentioned in the immune videos, mucus gets stuck in places and then it falls down your throat. And sometimes in mine, it gets stuck right in the spot in my larynx where it gets real unhappy. And the funny thing is the water doesn't even help because it doesn't get to the larynx, but it slows me down and forces my body to go, oh, hey, maybe this isn't actually that big a deal. And a little bit of mucus in your throat is not worth going crazy over. All right, the other half of today is talking about something new that I was reading that relates to COVID-19. So in the American Journal of Otolaryngology, which is essentially eyes and throat is the otolaryng part. Well, ears and throat. So ears and throat, which is where they connect. And it's talking about upper airway symptoms in COVID-19. And so this is likely to be something that a news article will pick up. So I want to look at it. It says, "Dear editor." So first of all, this is a letter to an editor. And as a note, it's not new research. It's just people taking old research and putting it together in a place and making a recommendation. And in this particular case, they're specifically making recommendations that relate very strongly to ENTs. So these are people who are essentially ear, eye, nose, throat type doctors that contracted this probably from people who had minimal symptoms. So they note a couple of things I've already seen, which is that there are definitely people who have some upper respiratory symptoms. However, they do note how low some of the percentages of them are. So some people do get sore throats with COVID-19, although the percentage of that is never higher than 17.4. So 1 in 5 at best, and probably closer to 1 in 4 or 1 in or closer to 1 in 10, because 11% is the middle ground. People might have a sore throat. And of course, it's such a vague symptom that sometimes it's hard to deal with. Sometimes my throat is sore when I have allergies. Sometimes it's sore when I'm getting a cold. They're very different. There are some people who have a little bit of nasal congestion, but it's like 5%, which is a really low number. So interestingly enough, the item that they do note, which I have seen in studies before, is the jump in cases of weak sense of smell. So sense of smell and taste seems to be affected, and strongly in people who are either asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic. So I do think that's interesting. That's one of the more common things. And it's still not like really common, because it says, let's see, about 33.9% in one of the studies they note has a taste or olfactory nose related problem, and 20% lost both. So it's still not an incredibly high amount, but it is a less common thing to happen. So if people completely lose their sense of taste and smell, and it has to be pretty noticeable for it to be that kind of loss. Like I know when I get a cold, my sense of taste goes instantly, because the moment your nose is stuffed up, a lot of that stuff kind of disappears because the chemicals can't get into it and things like that. So if you have a stuffy nose, and losing sense of taste and smell probably has nothing to do with it. But it's sort of interesting that that's one of the ways it was. It also talks about post-viral versions of that, so that's one of the symptoms that might be able to last, which makes sense if you're destroying some of the cells in the respiratory system. But as a note, they do mention that we do expect some COVID in the upper respiratory system, because that is part of how we test for it. But I would like to note that we don't expect a lot there. And in other studies I've read, it's pretty clear that it hangs out there a little bit and then is mostly gone and goes down into the lower respiratory system. So if the news starts reporting, oh no, nasal congestion and sore throat is a major thing that we should be looking for, it is not a major thing that you should be looking for. It is something that ear, nose, and throat doctors might keep an eye out for in their patients, especially since they literally have to be in their patients' upper respiratory systems, which is a problem. And they should be doing that, obviously, well protected, because you never know what you're going to get. And honestly, they should probably do that anyway. All kinds of cool stuff hangs out in respiratory systems that you don't want to get. But I worry that the news is going to start saying, oh no, these people are saying use this as a major symptomatic criteria. I would not say that that is a standard normal human person thing to worry about. And also, unless you're having other problematic symptoms in this country, you're not going to get tested anyway, because we don't have enough tests. But it might be worth noting for the future, because someday if we have the ability to test for antibodies showing if you've been infected, knowing that you had a period of no taste or smell could be useful for future research. It's probably not going to change anything right now, and don't start thinking of those as the major problems. So I want to note that paper. I'm sure it'll come up. I'm sure it'll be a headline somewhere. And also it's putting in evidence from other papers, which again is just sort of noting numbers that are kind of up in the air at this point still, since we don't have a lot of information. But there's definitely some version of that. The inherent problem with respiratory stuff is it all infects very similarly, and it's very hard to nail down. So that is a problem, but it's probably not going to be your problem. So, all right, that is my useful information for today. Have a good day. Maybe I'll see you all around. I'll be back on sometime around this time, which is between 10:30 and 10:45 on the East Coast of the United States tomorrow.